I think I always like asking the question, who's it for? And why are you doing it? Like, what's the vision? Who's it for? What's the design, right? Because that will drive the vision, and the design to me always is the aspiration, right? You might be clumsy, but if you're doing it in the right direction, I think that's always what counts. But having that vision, I think, is important. And again, constantly coming back and reflecting on that, right? These systems of power, I mean, talking centuries of investment structurally through policy, culturally, it's a paradigm shift that isn't going to happen overnight. And so it requires regular work and consideration. But part of that is also succession planning, I think, thinking about the last place that I was working at, my supervisor was always telling me, like, I'm always trying to recruit and train my replacement. And she was always looking for what was going to bring in that perspective that wasn't there yet before. And I think that's always important, thinking about succession planning, where we're at, and are we willing to give up power as well when it comes to doing things differently. And maybe it isn't us doing it, but just allowing that difference that is already here and it hasn't gone anywhere to have a more influence and more of a voice.
Yeah. Thank you. Even diversifying your workforce to look at the perspectives that are not being heard.
And one thing to echo from that is intentionality, thinking of that in your programming and who you want to create it for. One of the things that irks me with a lot of different organizations is the equating of equality being equity. They are different. You can say you've created programming for everyone. That doesn't mean everyone accesses it in the same capacity. I think that's a big thing that's easy to overlook, whether that be language barriers, whether it be accessing that programming, who participates, even what the staff might look like. That's something to think about too. Skills that staff may have, like language, that don't usually get recognized in a lot of this work. That's something that comes up a lot. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up. We've had this amazing conversation about really shifting perspectives and creating access. What other questions you all have for our panel?
What are your thoughts about destructive nature play? Because like from my childhood, like tearing a flower apart, or like stomping on acorns, or like peeling some tree bark off, like those tactile things were fun and neat and grounding and important to me. But also, if you're doing that with a group of students, that's maybe not the best for the place you're in. So I guess just thoughts about how to have some of those type of experiences, or what we can do.
One of the thoughts that comes to mind is directing that in a positive way. Like if you think maybe your students are wanting to break apart flowers, maybe can we buy Peruvian lilies, which are perfect for dissecting and breaking apart. How can we redirect that in a positive way? And I think this does take like background information on like staff end, but if we know maybe there are non-native plants in that area that we don't want in that area, suggest those. Like, hey, look at that spurge. Let's stomp that out. That's fine. Thinking about it in that context. And I know I've had this conversation with my daughter, like thinking about insects. Like, it's hard to extinct an insect, but we still care about them. So there are a lot of ways that come to my mind. But...
Oh man, I just think the philosophical questions that I would like to have, right? Why is it considered destructive? Do we not have impact? How is it that entangled possibly with the notions of pristine wilderness and nature? Have we not always had an impact? And so perhaps for me, I'm just in that conversation and having that conversation of like, we were always having an impact, but what impact do we have? What's our relationship to the impact that we are having? And I guess that's what I'm thinking of, is mainly opportunities to think about it. And I don't know, when first thing that came to mind too is like, I'm a pyro, I like fires. So I was like, that's always fun. So I always think about that. That was just what came up.
I'd say like, yeah, the part of like destructiveness that like might have be related to, like, as you said, like tactile, or like the whole like it's the feeling or like, I think it's part of like learning. I agree with like, well, how is the impact of that, you know, like maybe can be done in like in a control space, but I think like maybe changing the perspective into like, oh, we're destroying for destroying. Or like, oh, we're just breaking apart like this flower to learn about it and like still caring for it. Like not the vision of destructive as like, just because you're going to destroy everything, but like the care. I think I've noticed that like students and kids, like, and everybody actually, when you care about something, you tend to like work to preserve it. And even if you're like destroying something, it's not gonna be a big impact if you're doing with that perspective. But I also think it's important to not put a lot of the burden into like the individual or the children. I can't like lots of children in the park playing with like flowers is not going to be as destructive as like many companies that are around here and the things that they do. So I think like, oh my gosh, those children destroying those like bars, that must be, oh, that's going to be a problem for the environment. I'm like, I think that's an important perspective, but yeah, the camera.
That was a great question.
Okay, so for this panel, big question. Knowing that we are all environmental educators in some capacity, also existing in a state that has like a pretty dominant socioeconomic and also racial thing. My question for the panel is, how do we best equip children of all like race, economic, socioeconomic, everything? How do we bring them into people knowing that there is a socioeconomic, racial, everything divide? And what are our best practices and how we do that?
That's tricky. One thing that I've heard and love that our director said at Promise is we can't program our way to communal change. And I think a big part of that is thinking about partnerships outside your own organization, thinking how you can work with more than one organization to try to create communal change together. So for some, I guess some ideas that come to mind are thinking about specific programming that tries to reach certain groups. So for example, Latino Outdoors group I was with, that was a big focus, getting Latinx people into outdoor spaces. There is outdoor, yeah. There are these groups that exist, and partnering is something that a lot of people are seeking as it is. So I think reaching demographics in that way, thinking about who's not included and how we can include them, thinking about even just generations from now, thinking of instilling that with youth, having their family involved as well, because that is a big part of it at a young age. Thinking about their peers if we can get them involved. Like that's a big part of Mariana's work. I know I've seen in that program that if their friends aren't involved, they usually may leave that programming too. So it's very multifaceted and very complicated, but yeah, it takes a lot of work on a lot of different groups' parts.
I was thinking, I guess the genealogy of hip hop culture, there's this value of keeping it real. And then another one of like real, recognized real. And I think about like, even to this day, I've mentioned this story a couple of times, but like, I'm still salty about empty promises I was given at primary school growing up, you know, like, hey, we're gonna do this thing and we're building up, and then that person never showed up again, or they said we're gonna do it and then they didn't come. And so for me, being honest and transparent about our limits of what we can and can't do, but what we're willing to do, like our aspirations should exceed what we can do. But I think being transparent and honest about that, I think for me that always is helpful. And I think at least my perspective, right, as a young person, I think I could tell when I was being lied to or not being told the whole thing. I try to bring that into the practices that I do and those who I work with, and just be real with folks as to like, hey, this is what we're aspiring to. We're not there yet, or this is what we're able to do right now. We're not able to do, but I think respecting people and especially youth for being able to process some of those things, they experience it, right? They grew up in it, you know, like, there was no Whole Foods on the west side growing up, there still isn't Whole Foods up there. But, you know, we got more 7-Elevens than anything else, right? It's like food justice was something I lived and experienced. Like I knew there was stuff going on. I didn't have the language for it, I couldn't process it in the way that I do now. But I think I respect those mentors and leaders that were honest with me about what they were gonna be able to offer me or not. And having that boundary, even if it was frustrating, it built trust. And so I still have that respect and trust for those folks that might just be me, but that's just my thoughts.